This video shows how to configure storage for your OpenShift cluster on IBM Cloud Satellite. In our case, the cluster is running on AWS. These instructions are also available in the IBM Cloud Satellite documentation. Navigate to ibm.biz/sat-storage. We've already configured the satellite location and the OpenShift cluster, and we've configured 2 local storage volumes and attached them to each worker node in AWS. We need to get the paths to both storage volumes in order to configure storage. So we'll run a set of commands from the documentation to do that. Log in to your OpenShift cluster from the command line. We'll run the following set of commands to get the paths for the storage volumes. This command returned the host names of the 3 worker nodes on our satellite location. We'll debug each node to get the paths to the volumes inside of them. We'll run this command to view the mounted volumes. If you can see, we have the 2 volumes that we attached to the worker node in AWS here. One is 100 gig and the other is 500 gig. Neither of them are mounted. That's very important that they're not mounted. Next, we'll get the path to the volumes. So if we find this path and this path, let's start with the smaller one first. We'll assign this to the MON device path, which is required for storage. So if we look at NVMe4N1 and find that path, it's right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to build the path name by putting that right here. The MON device paths are the smaller volumes. The OSD device paths are the larger volumes. So when we go get the 500 gig path, it's NVMe E3N1, which is right here. So we'll paste this one in to the OSD device path. So one worker node is complete. Now we need to do the other worker nodes. All right, I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to run the OC get nodes again, and we'll do the next node. So we want to run this command against the second node. We're going to do the same thing. Whoops. In our case, all 3 worker nodes were provisioned when we created our satellite location in AWS. So they actually all look very similar. Again, you can see the 500 gig path, the 500 gig volume, and the 100 gig volume. We'll get the paths. So we'll get the smaller one first, which is the 4N1, which would be right here. And we're going to put that here, and we'll get the larger one, which is the 500 gig, which is the 3N1, which is right here. Again, all of this is in the documentation, but sometimes it helps to see it. Okay, so we're done with that one, and we'll go get the last one. By now you should recognize the pattern, and it becomes fairly straightforward at this point. Again, the most important thing is that the disks are not mounted. You don't want to choose one that's mounted. So we will grab the smaller one first, which is 4N1, and the path is here. And then we'll grab the larger one, which is 3N1, which is right here. At this point, we've got the information that we need to proceed forward with configuring the storage on our satellite cluster. Continuing with the instructions from the documentation, we'll now create our OpenShift Data Foundation, or ODF, storage configuration. One thing to note is that if your OpenShift cluster is version 4.7 or higher, you will use ODF for your storage. If your OpenShift cluster is version 4.6, you will use OpenShift Container Storage, or OCS. The instructions on this page in the documentation, though, are the same for both ODF and OCF. Now we're ready to continue with the commands from the documentation to build our satellite configuration. First, we're going to list the satellite locations to find the Manage From column that we're going to use in the next command. If you notice, the Manage From command is the WDC, Washington Data Center. We need to figure out what to target for the managed region in the next command. And since we know we're in the Washington Data Center, if you go to the link in the documentation, you can see that for the location WDC, the region is US East. So that means when we run this command, we can target US East. Otherwise, you'll have to replace US East with the region that you're running in. Now that that's done, we'll get the list of available storage templates and versions in our satellite storage configuration. We're going to use the ODF local template because we configured local storage on our volumes in AWS. Also, we're going to use version 4.7 because our OpenShift cluster is running 4.7. If your cluster was 4.6, obviously you'd use 4.6. The next thing we have to do is build out the storage config. This is the sample command from the documentation. I'm editing it for my environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is give it a config name. I'm going to paste in the name of my satellite location. The template name will stay as ODF local, and the template version I changed to 4.7. I gave my OCS cluster a name. I called it OCS-cluster.1. It should not exist already in your location, and it cannot contain any uppercase characters. Then I'm going to paste in my OSD device paths that we built in the previous step. So we have 3 of them. They're right here, and we'll paste each one in here. So the first one is going to go in here. The second one will follow that. Right here. And then the third one will go in here. We'll do the same for the MON device paths that we built. You want to make sure you don't make any errors in copying these in because your storage cluster will not start if you do. Then we're going to leave the number of OSD disks as 1 per worker node. And I'm going to get rid of all the other commands, all the other optional parameters here. We don't need to provide the worker nodes because we're going to use all of the worker nodes that we have available in this cluster. And the other parameters are not required. So I will delete that. And then I think we are good to go. At this point, we should be able to copy this command and run it against our cluster. And as you can see, our OCS config 1 was successfully created. Okay, we're on to our last step. we're going to assign the Odf Storage Configuration to our cluster. That's the storage configuration that we just created. All we need to do is get the cluster ID. So I've copied the commands in here from the documentation. We'll grab the cluster ID, and we can see we have two clusters at our satellite location. This is the cluster ID that we want to use. And then we're going to create a storage assignment using that cluster ID. We paste in the cluster ID, we paste in the name of the config that we created, config1, and then give it a assignment name. You can make up any name you want for that. If you copy that in and then let that run, it will begin to provision the storage on the cluster for you. You need to wait about 10 minutes before you can verify that everything is completed. There's a series of commands you can run here. First of all, when you assign the storage to the cluster, it's going to create a project called OpenShift Storage, and you can check the pods in there. You can see I've waited about 20 minutes, and now I can see that all the pods are running or completed. The next thing you want to do is you can run this command to check the OpenShift storage container, and you can see that it's completed. So that means that we have configured storage on our cluster. There's one final command that you may want to run to view the storage classes that are now available on your cluster. And these storage classes are available to your Cloud Paks when you install and configure them. This concludes our video. Thank you for watching.